So you've probably heard about this thing, the replication crisis in psychology. And yeah, it sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? Kind of like the whole field is built on a house of cards. But what if that's not the right way to look at it at all? What if this so-called crisis is actually a sign that something way more interesting is going on? This question, it really cuts right to the bone, you know? It's that little seed of doubt that pops up when we hear some famous study just couldn't be reproduced. I mean, if the results are different every time, what are we even learning here? It's a totally fair question, and today we're going to dig into a perspective that might just change how you think about science itself. To get why this feels like such a crisis, we have to first understand the idea of science that most of us were taught. This old dream of a perfectly objective, predictable world out there. Okay, so just to be clear, the whole foundation of the scientific method is this idea that if you do the exact same thing, you should get the exact same result. The replication crisis is what happens when that foundation starts to feel a little shaky, especially in a field that's as messy and human as psychology. And this quote just nails that core assumption. The idea is that reality is just out there, waiting for a scientist to show up and measure it. The scientist is supposed to be this neutral spectator, totally separate from whatever they're studying. But what if they're not? What if that's impossible? So let's explore a completely different way of seeing things. This is where we take that old dream and we flip it right on its head. This is where we introduce a whole new way of thinking about what science is. Think about it like this. Let's say you're trying to watch birds in your backyard. The second they notice you watching them, poof, they might fly away. Your very presence changed their behavior. Well, the same thing happens in psychology. People know they're in a study, and that knowledge changes everything. The observer is never, ever truly separate. This lays out the two worldviews so clearly. On one side, you have the old dream. The scientist is outside, looking in on some fixed reality. But on the other side, you have this new idea. The scientist is inside a dynamic system. They're a part of it. And because of that, the goal completely shifts from discovering facts to understanding relationships. And this new perspective, it has a name. It's called second-order cybernetics. It's basically the science of observing systems that are also observing you back. It's all about acknowledging that the researcher is part of what it calls the ecology of the experiment, influencing it just by being there. So, if the observer is actually part of the system, what does that do to our nice, clean ideas about cause and effect? Well, things get a whole lot more interesting. This is such a huge idea. We love to think that A causes B in a simple, straight line. But in a system where everyone is observing and reacting to everyone else, it's really more like a feedback loop. A influences B, sure, but then B turns around and influences A right back. And this is just the perfect metaphor for it, from that famous MC Escher drawing, right? Which hand is drawing which? You can't actually say. They're creating each other in real time. That's the dance of mutual influence between the researcher and the participant. It's a transactional reality. Okay, so this theory is all pretty fascinating, but what does it actually mean for a psychologist trying to do their job, right? How do you actually practice science in a world that's more like a dance than some predictable machine? Let's get practical. Take the famous power pose debate. The old scientific dream asks a very simple yes or no question. Is it true or is it false? But this new perspective asks a much more interesting and frankly more useful question. Under what conditions, for whom, and in what context might this actually be a meaningful practice? The goal isn't a simple thumbs up or thumbs down anymore. It's to understand the nuance. So the path forward seems to involve a few key shifts. First, something called epistemological superposition, which is a fancy way of saying we need to be okay with holding multiple truths at the same time, instead of always searching for the one single right answer. Second, we need methodological diversity, using a whole toolbox of different approaches, not just one rigid method. And finally, we need to create enabling ecosystems in science, research environments that actually reward people for exploring complexity, instead of just hunting for simple clickbait answers. And all of this leads to a new kind of guiding principle, a new ethical imperative for science. The goal shouldn't be to find the one final answer that shuts down all other possibilities. No, instead, the goal of good science should be to open up new questions, new perspectives, and ultimately more choices for people. Okay, so let's bring it all home. what does all this mean for the future of psychology and this so-called crisis? Well, it means we're not at an ending. We're actually at a brand new beginning. So this inability to perfectly replicate studies, it's not a sign that psychology has failed. Not at all. It's an invitation to go deeper, to get a better understanding of what it really means to study living, thinking, reacting human beings. It's an invitation for the entire field to grow up. What we're witnessing here is a fundamental evolution. Psychology is moving away from a science that treats people like static things to be measured, and it's becoming a science that studies the dynamic relations between people, their contexts, and the observers themselves. And in the end, that's what we're looking for. Not just isolated facts, but the patterns that connect everything. The researcher to the participant, the context to the behavior, the knower to the known. That is where the real understanding is. So maybe the next time you hear about the replication crisis, you won't see a field that's failing. Instead, you'll see a science that is bravely grappling with its own complexity, letting go of its old dreams and maturing. Psychology isn't broken. It's just growing up.